All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Sophia Hagelani-Alba. I have a feeling you've probably heard from me a few times over the last week, month, potentially even longer. Welcome to the final plenary session of today, May 25th. So this is the final plenary session today for Sustainability Science Days. We really appreciate you all coming to join us here. I know that we've had a very busy day today, moving through a myriad of amazing sessions. Hopefully you got to hear about things like AI, multi-species transportation, motivation, transformative care, and so many other things. I imagine that you're already pretty full with inspiration and motivation. Thus, we decided that for the last plenary session, we want to do more of a dialogue session. We thought this would be a way to have a more personal and natural interaction, and we're hoping that this will allow our audience to really connect with our speakers. So the way we're going to do this is I'll be the facilitator of this session, and we have our two lovely plenary panelists joining us we will all three of us be in conversation. Obviously this stars them, but I'll be asking some leading questions to bring us through our dialogue, and then we will open it up for questions and comments from the audience. As said, this is a dialogue plenary, so we definitely invite, if you have any interventions when we do open it up to the audience, we do want to hear from you. We want to hear your experiences also, because this is a topic that I'm sure everyone in this room has already had experiences with. So in this dialogue, we're going to be talking about doing inter and transdisciplinary research, the actual act of doing that research, of being a scientist that's operating in an inter and transdisciplinary way. We're going to explore this specifically through questions like, what does the future hold for young researchers who specialize in inter and transdisciplinary research? We came up with this topic because we often feel that we're very encouraged to dive into inter and transdisciplinary research. Like, it's talked about, it's a hot button topic. People are like, yes, transdisciplinarity, it's awesome. But then what is it like actually in practice? And where are the jobs then after we do this really great training for inter and transdisciplinary research? Is it always valued in the field as highly as it is in buzzwords? Is that a good way to put it? It's sometimes very difficult also to produce research outputs in transdisciplinary research. Where do our findings go? How do you report it scientifically if you're working with multiple stakeholders? But there's also a lot of moments of hope within inter and transdisciplinary research. So we're both going to talk about the challenges and the hopes that we find within this research space. So one of the things that we all talked about together in the pre-planning of this dialogue session is we wanted to kind of start everybody so we're on the same page with the same mental image. And so I'm going to use a metaphor here with bowls of fruit, okay? And so how we were thinking, and this is not totally unique to us, this has also been talked about in the academic literature, but one of the things that we put together that we were talking about is multidisciplinary research. That's, for example, you have a bunch of different fruits, they're all on the table, but they're in their own bowls. So there's a bowl of bananas, a bowl of strawberries, maybe a bowl of mangoes, I don't know, sea buckthorn berries, we are in Finland. And then when you're doing interdisciplinary research, you have all the fruit in the same bowl. You've made a beautiful fruit salad, but it's still individual pieces of fruit. But with transdisciplinary research, we're making juice. So we're taking all those fruits and transforming them into something where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Really good smoothie. So that's what we are thinking of when we're saying multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and transdisciplinary. Think back to that fruit. But like I said, I'm sure you've heard enough of me for the moment. So without further ado, I would like to turn the floor over to our wonderful plenary dialoguers. I'm not going to call you panelists, you're dialoguers, who are going to give some contextualization to who they are and what they do. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I am Elif Erdoğan Öztekin, and well, I was trying to find a profession, like how to define myself, and I would say I am trained as an architect. I did my doctoral studies in design, and now I'm doing my postdoctoral research in the Department of Architecture in Aalto. And during my doctoral studies, I worked in the field of design for sustainability transitions, and particularly worked with the cases of community initiatives who plan, design, build, and manage the sustainability transformations of their settlements. And the cases were from different parts of Europe in this case. So Sweden, Germany, Portugal, and some networks at European scale. So yeah, so while doing that, I was exploring the learning networks and learning processes, especially those that are mediated by design. So as you realized, there were many different fields that I had to explore and incorporate in my research, and that had multiple challenges that we can talk about later more. And I can say that now my postdoctoral research is focusing on implementing some new methods at the public sector, especially in urban planning and design practices. And with these methods, I aim to kind of contribute to the enhancement of well, multi-stakeholder inclusion in planning.
Well, that was a well-structured presentation. It will be a bit more messy on my part. So I'm Stefan Hauser. I'm a postdoctoral researcher with Helsus. Hi, Susanna. My background is a bit more messy, let's say. Even though I did a PhD also in architecture and urban planning, it was in history. But I have a legal background, so I have a master in environmental and construction law. And even before that, I did a few years of medical studies. So bear with me, it's the end. So the research that I'm doing right now is trying to identify the influence of industrial actors, in this case, petroleum actors, in the definition, creation, and application of environmental regulations, but also special regulations. And so, knowing that the petroleum industry started at the end of the 19th century, there is also this historical background, and now I'm trying to go back to my kind of medical studies a bit, and trying to see how the pollution of these industrial sites in cities, like in port cities mostly, have been completely ignored and are now influencing the health of inhabitants in port cities. So that's it in a nutshell, let's say.
That's a good nutshell. Well, in both of your descriptions and contextualizations of who you are, I do hear a lot of different fields and types of study that are coming together. So why have you decided to enter into this inter and transdisciplinary research space? What's the meaning for you, and what are some of the reasons that you've decided to take this approach rather than moving through research in a more disciplinary silo?
You want me to go?
Yes.
Well, for me, it was a question of opportunity. So when I started to look for a professor that would be willing to take, let's say, someone from a legal background, I was looking at people in faculties of laws and political science, and all of them were kind of dismissing my background as a, let's say, construction and environmental law studies. And so when I went outside of my home country, which was France at the time, then I felt like people were much more open. And so out of curiosity, I went into a faculty of architecture and urban planning, because like, even though it's legal studies, it's still linked to construction. And there I was welcomed like beyond any expectation. So I just grabbed this opportunity, and it kind of allowed me to just dive into inter and transdisciplinarity. And so I continued, of course, because it's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, in my case, well, I'm working on sustainability transitions and sustainable transitions of settlements. So it is already a very complex issue in itself, which cannot be, which is really difficult to understand from one disciplinary perspective. So there are, even in the topic itself, there are multiple different voices, multiple different point of views, but also I guess all the disciplines have some insights about the topic. So in order to have a holistic understanding of what's going on and to understand the challenge there and all those processes of change, anyhow, I guess as researchers, we need to take a step back and enable other perspectives, other disciplines, and other stakeholders' point of views to enter in the scene.
So it sounds like when you were doing this, like I said, Stefan, you told us that you were welcomed in with open arms in a department that surprised you. I mean, how did you get the original idea, though, to move into this? Like, was it something that just kind of one day you found like the right person, or did you do research to like kind of get to that point? What brought you like at the first moment to those departments?
Well, it ended with luck, but it started with luck too. So basically, because I was looking for funding for my research, I went on asking to companies, okay, would you be interested in my research? And at some point, I found one that was interested and willing to fund the entire 4 years. But when we with the company faced the refusal of a few researchers back in France, they were like, well, wait a minute, because I may know someone outside that is kind of open to trans and interdisciplinarity. Let's ask. And so when we asked, instead of having, yeah, maybe we could, no, it was like, hell yeah, let's go for it. So of course, like I just dived into it.
Fantastic. And what would you say, Elif? Did you start and end with luck? Has luck been part of it for you too? Or was there a more direct process that you went through to kind of get to where you are?
I think there were a lot of good coincidences. And of course, the element of luck is there. But also there was an intention to what kind of research that I would like to do. So if I'm going to be also more concrete with what happened in my case, like I was voluntarily, for example, participating in a community initiative of a permaculture farm, and then I was really impressed with the work that the communities are doing in their own places, and how they kind of learn by doing some hands-on experimentation and so on. And then, of course, I had this research idea, and going through some secondary resources, I kind of selected some cases, and then I approached to them very directly. Only one said kind of no, but mostly when you approach to people, organizations, or like institutions, and if you are proposing, a type of work, then they are gonna be willing to participate. But there are some challenges into that as well. So it's not perfectly, clear, but yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, both of you, for that insight. And you did just mention the word challenges. So I'm gonna go on this a little, because challenges are something that we all face in our research lives. And of course, we don't want to be completely negative about it. But with the inter and transdisciplinary research, we teased on a few of the challenges that sometimes come up when I was introducing the session. So I'd love it if you could both give me some insight into some of the challenges that you've found from a couple different perspectives. You can take this in some directions if you want, but I know that there are unique challenges, for example, sometimes within academia, sometimes with society. And I know that you've both mentioned that you have worked outside of strictly academic contexts with the research that you're doing, but also, and you don't have to go there if you don't want to, but I'd really love to hear if you've had any personal challenges with operating in this type of inter and transdisciplinary space. So if you feel like sharing with us some experiences, that's also welcome.
Well, on the top of my mind comes the personal challenge, of course, because transdisciplinary research is a relatively young approach. It's not a very conventional way of doing research, and with all the rigid structures like institutional structures that we have, but also all the trainings that we had and all the mindsets that are settled in our mind, it becomes a personal challenge as well to just move on with that type of research and to build confidence in it, actually.
Yeah, I can relate to the problem of confidence, and it's probably something that probably people here will relate to also, is the fact that, I don't know for you, but when I'm doing this research and I'm going into like conferences and talks that could be not necessarily related to laws or special planning, but like because I have a broad interest thanks to this topic, then I don't feel like I'm a real expert, because you need to have a good enough knowledge on regulations, on history, on special planning, on many different topics like pollution. For instance, for me, like it involves some chemical related papers and analysis, which I don't necessarily understand fully, but I know the extent of. And then you feel like you're not really an expert, and that's the in my opinion, that's the trick, maybe trying to make this illusion work that, okay, I'm not necessarily really good into chemical analysis, but for the rest, I can kind of step in and use it in a right way, like in another way, let's say, not necessarily the right one.
Yeah, I can continue a bit on that. While doing transdisciplinary research, you kind of, I guess, accept that there are multiple different ways of knowing. And then you need to also accept that you are not an expert, like partially in none of them, but still there's a need for the research to build confidence on what she says, or she argues. And then in order to do that, you need to grasp a little bit what all the fields, all different perspectives, disciplines are kind of saying on that topic, and then meaningfully integrate that into your own argument. And that is quite challenging. But in the end, I guess, once you do it, it becomes easier.
Yeah. Definitely. It's hard to adapt to the new methodologies. Like, for instance, when I came from my legal background into architecture and / history, when I wrote my first papers or my first introductions, and people were looking at this like, what the hell did you do? Like, this is really legal oriented type of paper, and you need to shift away from this kind of methodology and adapt to the new one and to the faculty you are in. So that was, for the first year, 2 years, a bit challenging, but it's kind of also interesting because you discover other ways of doing things.
Yeah. I think what Stefan says also touches upon the topic of language and terminology, and disciplines have kind of their own languages and ways of writing and so on. And as when you are operating in a transdisciplinary way, somehow you need to move away from one particular way of thinking and writing, and then build a common ground or a common language. And that is, I guess, an ongoing work. So
yeah, time to time, like I heard this also going on in the conferences here, but also, for instance, last week in the Beyond Growth conference in Brussels, the fact that people were saying we need to build a common understanding of the notion of, for instance, growth, or for instance, sustainability. But when you're talking to like people from different backgrounds, then the understanding of the notion is really different. So then you're like, okay, which one should I emphasize, or which one should I choose in a way? Like it depends on the audience that you have, and this can also be challenging.
So, of course, we are at Pathways of Hope, knowledge, action, and solutions. So I'm hoping that you can also share with us, you know, we do encounter these challenges. They are real and we don't want to brush them under the rug. But have you had specific points of hope in your, oh my goodness, sorry. What are the points of hope that you've encountered in your interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research journey? And where do you find hope in your own research? And for this choice and this career trajectory, what do you see the future as?
Well, for me, just the fact that I'm allowed to do this research, and that I'm being welcomed in houses in this how to say, institute, is already an excellent sign for me. Because even though so far, like before this postdoc, I applied to numerous positions. You probably did all the same in any case, but like when you apply to this, they're like, yeah, your profile is nice, but you know, we're really looking, when you apply for architecture or spatial planning, we are looking for a planner, or we are looking for an architect. And so when you apply and you're being told, yeah, like your profile is interesting and it is fitting this kind of transdisciplinary vision that we have, then it feels of course really good and empowering. And I think it's slowly happening. Like institutions, but also people are opening to this, because they realize that it's the only way, or it's one way to deal with the contemporary problems. So that's my point of hope. I see it more and more happening now.
Well, yes. Well, one hopeful instance that I remember very clearly is when I implemented a participatory method that I kind of designed according to the research needs with the communities that I was actually researching. And so I saw that there is so much interest in contributing to this type of research, actually. And they were very excited also to talk more, like, what is this going to happen, and what are you doing, and so on, which we don't have on a daily basis, you know, interaction with stakeholders and communities. So through some transdisciplinary methods, some participatory and collaborative methods, we can actually interact and learn more from each other. Yeah, that is one very hopeful instance that I remember. I was like, yes, this is the way to go. And then now I'm doing my postdoctoral project as part of the Urban Academy program, which is a partnership between Aalto University, University of Helsinki, but also the cities of Espoo, Vantaa, and Helsinki. And this is exciting me a lot, because there's already a network of stakeholders who are committed to do collaborative research.
And what about you out there? Like I said, I promised in the beginning that we would also interact with the audience. Well, now's the time. I'm ready to interact. So what about you out there? Have you had points of hope with your own inter and transdisciplinary journey? I know that a lot of people working in this room are also working in these types of research spaces and are making the effort to break out of just the traditional, academic to academic conversations, academic to academic research projects. I have a feeling that a lot of people in here are working toward, non-extractive research, if you will. So does anybody in the audience want to share a particular point of hope that they've had? Yes, and I need one of my lovely microphone carriers to please come and get the microphone.
Sure. For me, as now a mid-career researcher, I also would like to acknowledge, there has been acknowledgement of research groups or institutes in the case of, oh my God, being places of hope, or those places existing, giving hope to younger researchers. And Elif being a graduate of my research group, I also would like to turn this to the younger generations and say that what gives me hope are those more adventurous doctoral researchers who are actually coming into these more messy research environments, which makes the research possible, transdisciplinary research possible. So that gives me hope at this level of my career. And I think it's really important that younger generations realize this without them being courageous enough to take these steps into messy research environments. Transdisciplinary research wouldn't happen. So in that sense, this gives me hope. And every early career researcher who are in this conference, essentially struggling with the challenges that these guys are struggling with, gives me hope.
We're going to go to Susanna next, but I just wanted to make a quick reminder to our audience who's listening out there somewhere in the world that we have the Q&A function, and you are more than welcome to put a comment in the Q&A. I will totally read it out for everyone, or a question, either way. Susanna?
So while I completely agree with what Idil said and want to give my support to that thinking, and not to all the younger generations who are struggling to go out there in the messy research environments, I at the same time got a bit frustrated when listening to you, because I was like, hey, I'm slightly more senior than you are, and I had the same struggle. So hasn't anything changed? And now we scientific mothers should now perhaps take the responsibility of trying to really change the situation, call for educational ministries, call for whatever decision makers it takes, that the doors really open better, because this kind of knowledge that we are seeing in you, developing in you, all your young researchers, that's absolutely necessary for the planet Earth if we want to somehow live a meaningful life, and the coming generations of all species. If we want to give the opportunities for all of us on the planet, then we really need this kind of understanding and capacity. And if you are still stuck in the same situation where I was like in 1990 or something like that, that doesn't give me much hope at the moment. So let's promise that we try our best to do something about this.
All right, we're going to go a few rows back. Raise your hand again. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen and Elif, for your good talk. Of course, being multi, inter, and transdisciplinary is somehow challenging. Let me share my experience. I have background in sociology, and then I went into development studies. And when your colleagues or your former sociology classmates meet with you, they will ask you, where are you now? I'm in development studies. They'll ask you, what are the tools of analysis you're using in development studies? You become confused. So I think confusion is part of the game. And I think as contemporary problems are multifaceted and complex, we can't address them using conventional discipline, let's say economics or sociology. We need to embrace that multidisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity. I think over time, with hope, we can get out of this. Thank you.
Would Stephan or Elif have any response to any of the comments that we've had so far?
Oh, yeah, well, already thanks for being so hopeful about trans and interdisciplinarity. But I can also relate to your story, definitely. And I might be a bit provocative now, on purpose.
That's
Sorry.
why we invited Stephan. That's what he does.
Oops. So I think that relates also to the problem, maybe in my opinion, that people tend to, let's say, people that are settled in like really high positions tend to protect their disciplines. And so when you come and you're saying that you're coming from a trans or interdisciplinary background, and they ask you, what is your methodology? What are your tools and all? They feel like maybe you're taking their tools, you're taking the tools of someone else and you're mixing it together, and they're like, yeah, I could have done this, you know? And so, so they feel a bit maybe threatened by the fact that we are mixing everything together. And I don't know, maybe it's only my perspective, but I would be curious to know, like, I see a few of you laughing, so it's probably relatable. So I would be curious to know about that, but that's my opinion.
All right, we've got down in front. And thank you all for the patience with the mics. It's very important for our online audience who we can't see, but are just as here with us.
Yeah, thank you. And probably my comment wouldn't be quite hopeful. I'm sorry for that. But I'm just, because I have this thing in my mind, you know, like, yes. So like reflecting a little bit on myself, like I was trained as a meteorologist, but I have PhD in economics. So now I'm doing postdocs in Aalto. And then I feel like this is a little bit of my frustrations, and hopefully through these sessions, I could be a little bit more hopeful. I feel like, yes, this is important, this transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and now I'm doing it, being the only economist in the engineering group, basically. And I feel that sometimes it's a little bit superficial, the analysis that we are doing, for example, the research that we are doing, because we are trying to involve everyone, because we are trying to sort of like make everybody understand. So it's not getting deep. And then at the policy recommendation level, it is a little bit difficult to create a concrete policy implication. So now I feel like, okay, do I want to, I've been doing my postdoc now for a couple of years. And then now, like, do I want to go back to economics department, or do I want to continue working on this? What do I want to be? Do I want to specialize on something, and this and that? That's my frustration, and hope, I don't know if any of you feeling the same, or I don't know. Yeah.
Response from the front, second comment from the audience. Which direction are we going?
Well, I can definitely understand, like, while the microphone is going there.
It'll come to you, I promise.
I think it might also relate to the fact that we have to talk to a lot of different experts. And so in your field, if you're talking about meteorology to someone who is supposed to understand from an economic perspective, or from, you know, a legal perspective or special perspective, then you cannot really use the same sort of terms and notions. So indeed, because we are not really diving deep into our own disciplines, then we feel like we are just scratching the surface of things. And that's the feeling that I often have also, yes.
Yeah, well, I really relate to your comment, and it's nice to hear these stories of mixed path to how we came to this transdisciplinary environments, because I studied philosophy, and then when I wanted to do this other master in environmental change, everybody was saying they won't take you because you did something different and you need to have this biology or more natural sciences background. And I had this big moment of hope when I got in. And then it was in part delusional, because I felt that this transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary can be superficial, because you really have all these kind of different people with different backgrounds all together and need to create something that is good for everybody. And so for someone that will be too difficult, for some others will be too easy or something that they already know. But maybe, I don't know, my hope is that we are trying to accumulate knowledge. And in a way now I feel that what I studied before is really helping me. And the thing that I did after are just adding to what I had before. So I don't know. And also the thing about then how to disseminate knowledge. I think that's really important to think about it, because I already heard from many people that we have a lot of knowledge already. We need to find ways to use it and to spread it, and not to simplify too much, but still to do things. So I don't know.
And then, yeah, I was thinking about your comment now while they were talking. and and then the keynote yesterday from Andrew Stirling, and he was talking about how policy is actually working with old mindsets. Still, the mechanisms are still kind of quite old, and that we need to move away from evidence-based policy. And this, I guess, kind of is the essence of what you are trying to, address here. Because if we are using the old mechanisms, then we would need to create some sort of knowledge that they would want to use. And then in order to create that type of knowledge, then we need to do more or less the same things. And we know that by doing the same things, we are not going to somewhere different. So we are kind of repeating ourselves and then failing kind of humanity. So yeah, so I guess we also need to push for new types of knowledges. And I guess while doing transdisciplinary research, as you are working with stakeholders, you are reaching out to policy in different ways, maybe not through policy recommendations, documents, and so on. But when you bring all those actors into a room and make them talk to each other, maybe there is some sparkle of change already in that room. So the process might be kind of changing, and we don't necessarily need to produce, very rigid or concrete policy recommendations, which are kind of working with numbers and so on. Not all of us. I mean, I think we need those also. And I think we also need disciplines and very disciplinary experts and so on. But yeah, this is also very valuable.
We have time for one more comment from the audience, so please.
Sorry, I'll transition from this conversation back to your original question. One of the first pre-conference sessions for this conference was how to communicate your science better. And I remember one point mentioned was this idea of leadership not only occurring from the front, but also back and really importantly from the middle as well. And this conversation brings to mind that idea of leadership from the middle, and maybe one of the perceived benefits of interdisciplinary work is this idea that, oh, suddenly all these people coming together will be able to kind of communicate science better, but also encourage each other in their different disciplines and kind of merge together in some way. But I think my experience with it has been to review my work really self-consciously, and constantly be asking myself, like, am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed to combine these methods? Am I allowed to write this way? And that's kind of like a personal therapy session moment for me, but also,
Yes.
yeah, I think that's kind of a thing that researchers can maybe all sort of relate to.
Yes, I can, for example, relate to this a lot. Like, yeah, because we have been kind of taught, like, even though we have very, let's say, progressive professors, we are also being taught that there is a way to do research, and then there are some limitations and considerations, and then you always kind of reflect during the process if you are allowed to do something or not. And yes, I don't have an answer to that, but I guess that's a process to go through somehow.
Well,
Yeah.
then my answer would be yes, definitely do it. Like,
Yeah.
I mean,
I thought that you would.
yeah, of course, like that's the provocation is there. But yeah, I mean, if we are not doing it, who's going to do it? And second, it's also by doing stuff that could be meaningless or like provocative, that you kind of trigger something to happen. So, I mean, I used to say that no result in combining methodologies and statistics or data, it is a result in itself. So, I mean, we just need to kind of keep on going. I mean, and to rebound also on what you were saying is, I'm curious. I'm a bit curious in the audience who considers itself, or like himself, herself, like transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary researcher, or like I'm just out of curiosity. Can you raise your hand if you consider yourself? Okay, so I might be a bit even more provocative by saying that I see ourselves a bit as moderator in the end. So we are making the link between the people that are still really attached to their disciplines and us who have, if I may say, lack of expertise in all these different disciplines. So we have a bit of knowledge. We have like we are maybe the piece in the puzzle that kind of makes sense out of everything, by gathering ideas from people and creating a new one. I often went into this kind of meeting, for instance, for grant applications. Like I think of Horizon Europe, which are increasingly advertising transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary solutions. And I mean, this is what you need to do. Like then you bring all these people together, you think, and you kind of throw ideas out there to just see if it makes sense or not. They will tell you in any case if it doesn't make sense. So don't worry too much.
Wonderful. I love that idea. We are the piece of the puzzle that makes it, maybe we're like the last piece of the puzzle that will make the whole picture clear. What a beautiful metaphor. Well, I apologize. As always, I am also the time person. So I unfortunately have to say that it is now time to bring this wonderful dialogue to an end.